Welcome everyone. Happy Friday afternoon. The sun is out, the sky is blue, the weather is beautiful, and we have another edition of #AskRobco on a Friday with happiness, positivity, entrepreneurship, business, life, anything else you want to throw at us. Super excited for our guest today. Really honored. We've got a TEDx guest with us, David Horne. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Rob.
Thank you for joining. A little bit of background, a little bit of intro. David is fundraising, mergers and acquisitions specialist background. Did his TEDx on fairer funding. He's going to explain what that is, and he's going to tell us about his amazing life journey and what he's doing in the world today. So without further ado, everyone watching live, you know the drill. Questions on the right hand side, you write in the questions, we will give you the answers. And if you're not live, enjoy the questions and enjoy the answers. And if you're new, you've got the panels on the right hand side, put in your question there and we will get them to David and David will answer them. David, the floor is yours. Tell us everything about you, your life, your journey, your background, where you're from, how you grew up, how you got to be where you are today, and what you're doing in the world currently.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rob. Yeah, so hi, everybody. Lovely to be here. So my name's David Horne. I was born in Vancouver, Canada. So that explains my funny accent. And grew up in Canada, trained as a chartered accountant with PwC. And in 1987, my wife and I were offered a transfer with PwC from Vancouver to their office in Zurich, Switzerland. I'm a fluent German speaker, and so it made sense to go to a place where I could speak German. So we moved to Zurich in the summer of 1987. As I love to say, we had one-way airplane tickets, and I had a 2-year employment contract, and this summer it'll be 34 years since that all happened. So it was a pretty cool and exciting time. We ended up staying in Switzerland for 6 years, so 2 years with PwC, and then my biggest client gave me the proverbial job offer you can't refuse, so I joined them. Worked with them for 4 years in Switzerland and had the opportunity to move to the UK. My wife is originally from the UK. Her family immigrated to Canada when she was small. So she had family here. We had at that stage 2 young kids. And my dad was born in London as well. So we both have dual citizenship. And so it was a no-brainer to move to London. And so we moved to London in '93, and London's been home ever since. So I carried on working for some big companies. So the company I left PwC to join was AT&T, the US telecoms group. And I stayed with them for 8 years in total, and then moved over to a different role within the BBC for 3 years, which was a fascinating experience. But I discovered that the BBC and I were really not meant for each other. And so I left that in 1999 thinking I was going to get a job with the .com. Thank goodness I didn't, because it wasn't long after that that the whole .com boom began to crumble. But I ended up in a fascinating business that began a 10-year stretch. So from 2000 until 2010, I was the CFO of 3 very different companies. One of them was a PR agency group owned by a New York-based agency. The second one was an AIM-listed business in the digital media and publishing sector. And the third one was also an AIM-listed business that was an industrial auction, online industrial auctioneer. So we used to sell used industrial equipment online. So 3 completely different businesses, but they all had one thing in common, and that is that they raised money and they bought other companies. So all of a sudden, I found myself at the end of 10 years, having raised over £100 million in debt and equity funding, and having bought or sold about 24 companies. And by the end of that, 2010 was kind of the tail end of the financial crash, and I had a bit of a burnout and decided to go out on my own. Initially, I decided to do something completely different, which was launching a wine business. Wine is one of my hobbies and passions in life, but I soon discovered it's a pretty brutal market. It's a very, very tough place to.
Because there's no margins in wine, like
There's no
literally.
margins in wine. It's really tough. Yeah.
It's
Wonderful product, wonderful people, but just a brutally competitive industry.
and then your distribution and supply,
Exactly.
and once you put all that together,
Yeah.
if you've got pennies left, you're lucky.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you're selling millions and millions of bottles of wine, you can make it work. But I didn't get to that level. So, but it was a great experience to go through. It was a tough time, but I learned a lot. And then I started working as a freelance CFO to business owners, and that kind of evolved and developed over a few years. And then I got to a point where I realized actually where I can really add value is being very selective of the kind of entrepreneurs that I work with. And so I now today focus on working pretty much exclusively with businesses that are on my core consulting side, pretty much exclusively with businesses that are turning over at least £1 million a year, because that gives them enough scale and scope and size that it might well make sense for them to go out and raise some capital and buy some companies. And to that end, I wrote a book in 2019, Add Then Multiply.
Best-selling Amazon book.
Yeah, and in fact, as a special gift, the person who asks the best question today, I will send them a signed copy of the book.
Thank you, very kind of you.
My pleasure, my pleasure. So yeah, so I wrote the book, and I've been working in the last couple of years since then, pretty much exclusively, as I say, with entrepreneurs on raising capital and scaling their companies.
Love that.
And during the time that I was writing the book, I also was starting to do more public speaking, and I was speaking at an event about fundraising for SME businesses. And a woman came up to me afterwards and asked why so little funding went to female entrepreneurs. And I said, I have no idea, but I'll find out. And that has led me on a journey of discovery over the last couple of years. I subsequently was in a meeting with the chief executive of the British Business Bank, someone who I'd met at a networking function. And we were having a nice conversation. And towards the end of the conversation, I thought, well, I'll just ask her if she knows anything about this issue. And she smiled and reached down to the bottom drawer of her desk and brought out this report that the British Business Bank had just published called UK VC and Female Founders. And it was a study of all of the VC deals done in the UK in 2017. And they found that all female teams submitted 5% of the pitch decks and got less than 1% of the money. And mixed gender teams submitted 20% of the decks and got about 10% of the money. And all male teams submitted 75% of the decks and got more than 89% of the money. And that just started a thing in my head that just went, this is wrong. And I met with more people and talked about things. And in the end, I decided that I had to put on an event. And so we ran an event in November of 2019 at the London Stock Exchange. We had over 100 people attend, and we had speakers who were entrepreneurs at different stages of their businesses, people who'd raised angel funding, raised venture capital, private equity. We even had someone who had done an IPO and presented that and got tremendous feedback as a result of that, and thought, okay, let's see where we can take this. And so we started to plan to do a series of events in 2020. And then, of course, a little thing called COVID came along and put paid to those plans. But over the summer, I was talking with my team, and we said, well, look, let's just run another conference, but we'll do it online, and let's do it on the anniversary date. So on the 25th of November 2020, we ran another conference, this time online. We had over 150 people attending this from as far west as San Francisco, as far east as Cebu in the Philippines, and as far south as Cape Town in South Africa. So we know we've tapped into a global kind of thing here. And since that time, I've also been researching for my second book that I'm in the process of writing now, which will be all about how do we assist female entrepreneurs and also male entrepreneurs who basically aren't white men. So it's kind of female and diverse entrepreneurs. Because one of the things that we discovered from those events was it wasn't just women who faced a very uneven playing field, but also men who, basically who weren't straight white men. And so I'm putting this book together, and we're running a series of events this year all about how can we level that playing field. And that was the subject of my TEDx talk as well, the fight for fairer funding. And that will also be the subject or the title of my book. And that's probably my 10-minute rant.
Brilliant. Let's go back to your roots, David. So let's understand a bit about your journey. Did you grow up believing or being parented to go down the corporate path? Did you grow up and were parented to go down the more entrepreneurial path? Were you working from a young age, or was it all about education? Talk us through how David become David as a younger person to then going into the world.
Yeah. So I got my first job at the age of 12, delivering newspapers. And it's a little different in Canada. I mean, when I see kids here in the UK delivering newspapers, they'll have an arrangement where they'll go down to the newsagent and pick up 10, 20, 30 newspapers, and they deliver them, and that's that. In Canada, I was delivering newspapers to probably 75 homes, and it was just one paper. It was the local daily paper. And the other key thing that was different was, as part of that, we had to go around at the end of the month and actually collect money from our customers. And that was a huge thing for me, because it taught me to connect with people at a very human level. And it taught me all about dealing with money. And it was really interesting because I really enjoyed that. And I liked dealing with the money, and I liked talking with the people. And I remember, you know, the regional manager for the newspaper would come around to my house once a month and collect the newspaper's share of the money, and I would keep the rest. And I would always have it nicely organized, and it was all, you know, carefully counted out and in piles and ready to show him. And he said, you really like dealing with the money side? And I said, yes, I do. And he said, well, look, we've got a couple of kids who are not very good at it. How would you like to pick up doing the collections on their thing, and we'll pay you a commission based on the money that you collect. So they'll carry on delivering the papers and you collect the money. I said that was great. And within about 3 months, I was doing collections for about 6 or 7 different newspaper rounds, and actually gave up the delivery of my own round because I really liked that money side of things. And it was interesting.
I have a nice story for you, David. So I also did newspaper rounds, and I also did the local newspapers. So the way it worked is, here, because they were free newspapers, you got given roads. So I got given 4 roads around where I lived, and I had a combined 200 houses in those 4 roads. And every week I had to deliver the newspaper to every house. And maybe where there was a ferocious dog, that house maybe got it left on the outside, or sometimes didn't get it delivered, but the rest I did. And for me, I realized there was a marketplace then. We had 3 or 4 local free newspapers. So I made the decision that, well, if I'm going to all the houses anyway, if I get 3 or 4 of those newspapers and I deliver all of them to each house, I'm getting 3 or 4 times done for the same time, more or less, as I'm doing one. So I did road by road. So I split the 200 into groups of 40 and 50 and gave everyone the 3 or 4 newspapers. So I was able to get paid 3 or 4 times the amount for doing the work. At the same time, we got paid on a penny per paper delivery. So 200, and you got paid whatever, 2p or 1p. So again, I was able to negotiate because I knew what everyone was charging everyone, and got a good. So I just think that the moral, again, I was doing it the same as you, 10, 11, 9 even. You know, that's how you learn about the real world. That's how you learn about business. That's how you learn about people. And I think that sets the tone for everything you do moving forward in life. I think if you don't grow up washing cars, doing newspaper routes, cutting lawns, working in a hairdresser's, working in a shop, if you're not doing that at 10, 11, 12, 15, 17, whatever, you haven't learn the fundamentals and the basics of the business world and life. And I think that's huge.
And what a great age to learn it at, because you're young, and if you make mistakes, it's not going to matter. And nobody's going to, nothing's going to be too bad. I mean, I guess the worst thing is you could get fired, but so you get another job. Not a big
So
deal.
then,
No, I agree completely.
from that story, it's very clear then you love dealing with the money. You were very organized. You understood how business worked and operates. So going down the accounting route was an obvious path for you, or your parents?
Actually no. I was planning to go down the banking route, and I had actually, during my summer breaks on university, I worked for the Royal Bank of Canada, and initially as a teller, and then I was in this one branch, and the manager said, you've got ambitions, what would you like to learn? And I said, well, I'd love to come into the bank's graduate training program. So he started rotating me around the branch and doing different things. And in the summer after my third year at university, I was in a 4-year degree, I got a phone call from the manager, and he said, look, Canada has just gone into a very deep resources-based recession. The bank has frozen all of their graduate recruitments. I don't know how long this is going to last. But he said, David, I'll give you a job as a bank teller. And then he looked at me, and this was the first piece of career advice anyone had ever given me. He said, but you didn't go to university to be a bank teller, did you? And so I went up to the campus recruitment office, and it turned out that in 3 weeks' time, the accounting firms were doing their usual milk round. I had 2 friends whose dads were chartered accountants, so I went and met with them. And these 2 gentlemen were chalk and cheese. One of them was actually the chief accountant of the university, a lovely man, but very much your accountant's accountant. Think Monty Python and all that. And the other one was a property dealer, and he had taken his accountancy training and applied it very successfully in the business world. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to give this a shot. And so I applied for all of the firms. It was the big 8 back then. And I got interviews with 7 of them, and I got a job offer from PwC. It was Price Waterhouse back then, before they'd merged with Coopers. And it was actually interesting, because I didn't know this at the time. I had been studying German through school and through university, because I love languages as well. And it turned out that the reason they picked me was because I was a fluent German speaker, because unknown to me, Price Waterhouse had just made a major acquisition of a accountancy group that had offices throughout Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, and they were desperate for qualified accountants who could speak German. So
I think that's pretty huge. And again, to share with you my journey and my story, and it's a great one for the audience as well. Working for a major corporate, so I was very lucky to work at CBRE, one of the top 4 real estate property companies in the world. And I got a position there, one, because I'd learned Spanish and I was fluent in Spanish, and 2, because I could speak English. I got the opportunity to work in the overseas office. And it's not always the most direct and obvious way that you enter into a major corporate, or it's not because maybe you excelled or your CV looks great. Sometimes it's just a secondary thing, like a language, that gives you the opportunity. And that was the thing for me. I definitely got there because of a secondary reason, not a primary reason. Ultimately, it's whatever opens the door that gives you the opportunity that allows you to progress in your career. Let's stick with the corporates, because we get a load of people on here, graduates, young professionals, who want to understand working for one of the big 4, or working for a smaller family practice or mid-size, and what are the pros and cons, and what's your viewpoint on that?
Well, it was really interesting, because I did my training with PwC, and I ended up in a small business office. And I had friends who were in the main Vancouver office, and that was very much big corporate. And I remember so I joined in September, and we went on our first training session. And then we went to work for 3 months, and then we all got back together for the next training session at the beginning of December, or just before Christmas. And I remember talking to one of my friends that I'd met on this thing, and we were just talking about the different work that we'd done. And I'd been working at 7 or 8 different businesses. I'd worked at a lumber mill. I'd worked for a couple of car dealerships. I worked for a small technology company. I can't remember all of the other ones, but a whole range of different things. And this friend of mine had spent 3 months auditing cash at the Provincial Hydro Authority. Now, it was great, and she knew everything about auditing cash, but I just sort of look back and think, God, I would have been bored to tears after about 2 weeks of that. So, you know, I'm fortunate that I was able to be in one of the big players, because as my career progressed and when I qualified and started working internationally, I worked on some really, really interesting and complex assignments. But I'm very glad that I started out in a small business office, because I really learned the nuts and bolts of accounting. And because I hadn't been planning on going into accountancy, my degree isn't in accountancy. It's in economics and German. So I mean, I could pick up the accountancy and that was fine. But by working in a small business office where you're dealing with companies that are, we used to have personal tax clients. There'd be a guy who ran a pub, and he'd come in and, he'd have a cash book, and he'd filled up most of the transactions, but he forgot a few, or he'd miss a page, or, and he had his bank statements, but one of them wasn't there. And you had to piece these things back together. And that was a tremendous experience that really just taught me fundamental nuts and bolts accounting. So that now when I'm faced with something that's technically more challenging, and I don't do a lot of accounting work anymore, but I can still talk to people about things that are technically more challenging. And I'll just go back and I'll say, well, hang on a minute, let's just work out the debits and credits on this and make sure it works. And I've come across so many people who have done just the training in the big things, and they don't have that fundamental. So I got lucky in that I was in a big firm, but I started my training doing small business stuff.
Love that. All right, let's get to some of the questions, David. So
Okay.
any advice for a student who has no idea what to do in life after graduating?
Wow, no idea what to do. I would say if you literally have no idea what to do, then I would probably look at some of the bigger companies that still offer graduate training programs. Research the ones that are out there and find one that you like and that you'd be proud to say that you worked there. So, I mean, we're talking companies like Marks and Spencer or Argos, or, I think all of the big retailers do it. Some of the banks do it. It's been so long since I've looked at that kind of a marketplace, but I would just research who offers graduate recruitment graduate recruitment programs, and research those companies and figure out which one you'd be proud to work for. That would be my advice.
Great.
Because you don't want to go into a job that you hate every day.
Yeah, for sure. Next question. What did you learn the most in being in the entrepreneurial world that you possibly didn't learn in the corporate world?
What did I learn the most in the entrepreneurial world that I might not have learned in the corporate world? Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, definitely. In the corporate world, failure is a bad thing. And in the entrepreneurial world, failure is a word that is used to describe the learning process. And I love the fact that I can now comfortably and confidently go out and say, I don't know the answer, but I'm going to give it a try. Let's see if we can figure it out. If it doesn't work, we'll try again. But let's see if we can figure it out. Whereas in the corporate world, it was almost a case of you have to know the answers. And if you don't know the answers, you're a failure and you're bad. So yeah, that's probably the biggest difference for me.
Love that. You talked earlier about burnout. Can you share with us what that was, and again, how that happened, and I suppose what you learned from that?
Yeah. So from 2006 until 2010, I was the CFO of this auction company. And we we found out that our largest global competitor was up for sale. It had been private equity backed, and they were selling the company. And so we went out and raised 28 million pounds on the stock exchange, bought this company, did a huge global restructuring. So we were in 16 countries, they were in 10 or 11. When it was all done and dusted, we had operations in 23 countries. And I had to go around the world and sorting out the restructuring and legal entity mergers. And we had 3 countries where we had a significant overlap, and we had to strip out a lot of cost. That was the whole justification for the fundraising, was that we were going to strip out costs so that there would be a return on the investment. And we did everything that we said we were going to do. And we came back to the markets and said, we've ripped out the cost, we've done all the consolidations, everything is on track, and we think we're going to hit our numbers. And a week later, Lehman Brothers went bust. And that was sort of the beginning of the financial crash in the late noughties. And 6 months and 4 profit warnings later, the chief executive got fired. It wasn't his fault that the company was going through a bad time, but you know, that's life in public companies. When things go bad, someone's head has to roll, and the board and the investors decided that it was the chief exec. And so a new chief exec came in, and he and I were not good with each other. The relationship just never really gelled. And you know, that happens sometimes. But I felt a great sense of responsibility, because you know, we had a lot of people reliant on us. You know, we had several hundred, probably 300-400 employees in the company. You know, in countries around the world. I had been the continuity vis-a-vis the investors, and I felt I had to stick around for a period of time. But once I kind of got all of our debt facilities renegotiated, and having given it about a year or so with the new guy, and I just came to him one day and just said, look, this isn't working. Let's be grown up about it, and I'll move on. And so we organized an orderly transition. But during that time, I was working so hard. I racked up 1 million miles on my British Airways account. I was traveling so much. And, you know, that takes its toll on you. And I wasn't happy at work. And my new boss and I did not get on at all. I had a great relationship with my team, still in touch with most of them to this day, you know, 10, 11 years later, but just was not satisfied. And that just led me into a place where I had to get out. And that's when I left and launched the wine business. And I had all these wonderful ideas about how amazing the wine business was going to be. And being a numbers guy, I quite quickly realized just how thin the margins were in wine. And it got to the point where I realized that the effort that I had to go through to get someone to buy a case of wine wasn't worth the money that I made in the process.
Yeah.
And I went into this spiral of decline that lasted 18 months. And it was a dark place. And it was slightly dangerous. Working in the wine trade, I had the ability to go and taste wine every day if I wanted to, and some days I did. And you're not supposed to swallow, but it's easy to nip a little bit. And so, yeah, I drank too much, and I did some drugs, and I just went into denial. And yeah, it was a scary time. And it was my dad's accidental death 18 months later that was the impetus that gave me the kick up the ass that I needed to pick up and fix my life. And you know, it's interesting. I look back on that day. That was 8.5 years ago now, and it was the saddest day of my life, but it was also one of the most important days of my life, because it gave me, as I say, the impetus to get out of the hole that I was in.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
So, yeah, no, well, you know, again, in a corporate mindset, that would have been failure. I look at it now with the benefit of hindsight, and it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. And whenever I look at doing anything that's risky or I'm not certain about, I think, well, I don't want to go back there. So it was a good learning experience to go through. It was hard, but you know, everybody has difficult things they go through in life.
Last question before we give you the platform for your leaving message and a bit of positivity for the weekend. So do you believe that support and training for employers has been eliminated through the years, and how important do you believe training in the workplace is based on your experience?
Oh, training in the workplace is of critical importance. You know, in particular, like coming back to that question of the graduate who wasn't sure what they wanted to do. You know, you're coming into the world of work, and you've got everything that you've learned at university, but you don't really know, if you've not worked anywhere before, you don't know what it's like. You don't know how to come in, and you know, you can't just sort of be told, right, well, you know, go over there and sit at that desk and do those things and figure it out. It would be a disaster. So training is absolutely 100% critical. Even more so, I find in entrepreneurial businesses. So I've got two people in my team, and I have a lady who works for me in South Africa. She and I met through an agency initially. She worked for me as a virtual assistant, and as my business has grown, I've needed more of her. So she worked now for me full time. And I also have an intern who works for me. He's a university student, and we met through an event at his university, and he works for me 2 days a week. And I make sure that we do a lot of work on training and development, and sometimes it's just on the job, sitting down and teaching people how to do things, and sometimes it's you know, doing courses and events and stuff. And I would say today, on average, I'm spending probably 4 or 5% of my turnover on training and development. So
Good.
it's absolutely critical, absolutely critical.
Brilliant, love that. Quick message. Any advice for a mature graduate looking for a graduate level job? And then where can people get hold of you? What impact are you looking to have in the world, and what positive message do you want to share with us to close out the show?
So where can you get a graduate level job as a mature graduate, as opposed to like a 21 or 22-year-old?
Yeah.
Same place. Research the companies that are offering, you know, graduate management training roles. Reach out, you know, if you're interested in entrepreneurial businesses, reach out to some entrepreneurial companies. Have a look at entrepreneurial websites or publications or things like that. You know, those kind of companies are always looking for bright, intelligent people. And certainly from my perspective, I love the idea of someone who's gone back to university as a mature student and is now coming out into the marketplace. They've probably got a few years of other work experience under their belt. Yeah, just be open-minded, and think a little bit outside the box. But I would say for that one in particular, I'd look at entrepreneurial companies.
Brilliant. David, you've been amazing today. Love hearing your story. Great journey, great inspiration. Closing message, where can people get hold of you? What impact do you want to have, and a bit of positivity for the weekend?
Wonderful. So where can people get a hold of me? If you Google David B Horne, B as in Bravo, David B Horne, you will see me on the right-hand side of Google, and my website's there. You can connect with me through that. My email, if you want, is dbh, Delta Bravo Hotel, David B Horne, dbh, at addthenmultiply.com, just like the title of my book, Add Then Multiply. And the free copy of the book goes to the person who asked the question about the mature student, because I thought that was a really cool one. And final dose of positivity. The world is your oyster, and I think everyone has the opportunity to do whatever they want to do. That doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean it's going to come to you handed on a plate. But I believe that every one of us as human beings has it within us to achieve and fulfill our own dreams if we just stay focused on them and stick with them and go for what it is that you want to know. So find something that you really love and feel passionate about, like I do with my initiatives around funding focus and the fight for fairer funding. Find something like that and just go for it. Follow your dreams, follow what you want to do, and work hard at it, and it will come. It might not come straight away. It might take a while. You might stumble and fall a few times on the road, but you will get there, and it will be worth the journey. Good luck. Thank you.